Take your time, John. There's no rush. It's a pre-record anyway. So.
Exactly. Hello and welcome. I'm John Ryan with Broadsheet. You're very welcome to Tomorrow Tonight. You give us 20 minutes and we'll give you tomorrow tonight. And with us is, we're very honoured to have Bernard Purcell, who's editor of the Irish World, based in Cricklewood in North London, Northwest London. Good evening, Bernard.
Good evening, John. Thank you for having me.
No, we're very welcome. We're going to go through some of the Irish World. It's on shelves today.
Wednesday, yes.
So
and Thursday in Ireland, but the Wednesday definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll have a look. It's actually on the site on Broadsheet today under the papers. And I wanted to ask about the Galtymore. Are you yourself based in Cricklewood?
We're on the North Circular Road, actually, just towards Staples Corner. It's NW2, so we're equidistant between the cosmopolitan Neasden and Cricklewood, and also Brent Cross, with the Welsh Harp just on the other side of 6 lanes of traffic.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, how's Neasden doing in the cup, or are they in the?
How's who doing? Sorry.
Neasden FC, aren't they?
Oh, you're referring to Private Eye and Ron Nee.
Yeah.
There's actually, Neasden was traditionally for a long time very Irish. It's now also very Romanian and lots of other nationalities. It's quite a melting pot, always has been. For a place that was once originally very suburban, but it's definitely a melting pot of lots of different slices of life.
Tell me, are we at war with Scotland?
Are you talking about there's a question mark over that, isn't there? That apparently some Scottish patrol boats had stopped some Norwegian trawlers or fishing vessels, which came as a revelation to a great many people because no one's aware that the Scots have their own navy yet or that they've deployed them. The fish is usually used as a kind of emotive.
No, but the Rockall tonight.
Oh, you're talking about that one,
which is also technically Scottish as well.
Well, it's always been disputed. There was a chap from the SAS who many years ago, you will recall, went and fastened himself to Rockall to establish the Crown domain over it. And every so often you'll find, if you go through some of the cabinet papers of about 40, 50, 60 years ago, it comes up because it was deemed to be something strategic. And at one point, people even thought there might be oil reserves around there because of its location. But this could be something very serious. But even though Scotland has Trident submarines, they don't actually have the keys or the codes. So we're probably going to be okay.
No, I gather it was the last British colonial settlement in 1955.
You're then more knowledgeable about this than I am, because Rockall, while it has turned up a couple of times, there's never been, it's always just been something of sometimes an and finally at the end of the news. It's used as a kind of touchstone, it's symbolic more than anything else. Having said that, but if you see any streaks going across the sky, that might be the nuclear missiles.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's 25 meters wide. It's not habitable. I mean, people have not been able to sort of live beyond 20 days or 30 days in it. So
unless they can find a way to repurpose all the bird shit or the guano on it, and there's an awful lot of that.
Okay. So I'm going to share the screen now with you, Bernard, and we're going to go through tomorrow's papers. The ones we have, which is most of all the English ones, which we usually get, but only about 3 titles. I'm going to start with the Irish Examiner. Bernard, have you had a chance to have a look at that?
I can see that, yes, and it's a headline that one could have seen at any time in the last 12 months, certainly in the last 10 months. Total lockdown to be agreed, schools and construction. It's hard to, it looks now as if they are going to introduce some fairly strict measures, but there's an awful lot of anecdotal evidence that even when people were not supposed to be travelling back to Ireland, at least before Christmas, plenty of people did still travel, and people have been coming and going. One of the stories that has made its way back to us a lot of the time is that when people were given a bit of a nod and a wink by the authorities when they were told that they would be self-isolating. Now, there are individuals who are very conscientious about it. There are others who haven't been, as you're aware. And it does seem, both in Ireland and in Britain, that politicians have been terrified of confronting the public or enforcing a fairly strict law of the land in terms of mobility because of the infectiousness of this disease.
Okay, can you see that? The son of sort of made a kind of dramatic Shutter Ireland, no entry to Ireland without a negative test. And
which is something that a number of the Netherlands and Germany and others have been putting those kind of restrictions on. And from places with particularly high infection rates. And it's something that Boris Johnson alluded to or suggested would be happening in this country today, over here in the UK as well. But it does seem as if it's, given the sheer volume, as if it's more symbolic, and which is not to say that it shouldn't be done, but it is rather late in the day, insisting that people have a test that they can show that they are clear. It's certainly the norm now for since January the 1st, or since even just before January, I should say, for truckers going through Kent. They have to take a test and they have to show that they are COVID-free.
Right. Returning Irish people then from London to Dublin will have to have a negative test as well, will they?
I assume so. We do not know, because one of the kind of anomalies that we've seen has been the invocation of the common travel area as a reason for people being able to travel between the two countries without any kind of restriction, although that has not been the case in the last 3-4 months for people going from London or the UK to Ireland. There are no such, to date, there's been no such restrictions on people coming from Ireland into the major airports here, although the biggest difficulty they have faced certainly is getting an actual flight or getting an actual crossing.
Okay, there was a couple more stories there on the Examiner front page. I'm sure you're familiar with the killing of George
The Kencho case, yes. It's something we have seen, and it's something that we've been careful to avoid anything like a hot take on it, because there's always a rush sometimes to try and emulate what is happening elsewhere. Now, this is quite clearly tragic, and nobody wants to prejudge, although it seems certainly, I'm sure not everybody wants to prejudge. Some public figures do appear to have done so early on. This is what the gentleman who, with a history of mental illness, had a knife and was deemed to be a threat and was shot by police. And I gather that some far-right groups in recent days had tried to, on social media, had tried to suggest that he had a string of convictions when so the Gardaí took unusual action in saying that he had absolutely none. I think the Sunday World ran that at the weekend in particular. But there's a nasty undercurrent happening in Ireland at the moment. I mean, some people will say that progressive left or and it's an odious term, say woke people, I want to actually try and replicate Black Lives Matter over in Ireland. Yet at the same time, as we saw with the Balbriggan fire some months ago, there's people looking to try and promote or to exploit any kind of racial tensions, and there's a nasty far-right underbelly that where there's any kind of incident involving race, they're looking to try and stir the pot even further, and it's something that's happening mainly on things like social media.
Yeah, there's probably another discussion there for both of us, Bernard, but I'll just get through these papers. The Echo, can you see that?
If you bring it up now in a second.
Sorry, 1 second.
Both the Echo and the Examiner are owned by the Irish Times these days, aren't they?
They are. Although no change in style or anything. It's the same. They're the same. They haven't really undergone any change since the.
No, it's good to see. I think probably they took a. It's arguable that some of its readership thought it took a change in the wrong direction when they dropped Cork from the title, but they seem to have been pushing some very good local stories and some good political stories. I can see that on the Echo there, it's talking about 767 new cases of COVID-19 in Cork, and then a good kind of family pick there, and man charged over threats to a named family in the headline. All as any, well, to quote, I think it was Tip O'Neill who said that all politics is local. Any good newspaper is as well. It has to speak to its base, and in the past, some titles have been caught up in the same thing that has happened on the web with a certain amount of churning, so they become almost identikit. So something that speaks to its, gives you a sense of its locality and its readership is always good.
Yeah, I just, this is where things get really sort of very gloomy and weird, and this is the Tomorrow's Telegraph. Promises offered to give jobs snubbed by ministers. I'm not sure what that's about.
The Telegraph has not been essential reading for, I think, anybody who's been trying to keep on top of these things. It's rightly or wrongly assumed a reputation because of its closeness to Boris Johnson, who was a very well-paid columnist on it, as something of a leak of first resort, and it's been quite uncritical. One of its columnists there on the bottom of the page there is somebody who's a particular, seen as COVID denier or COVID skeptic. The Telegraph would not be the most essential source of news or information. What you would get is an insight into, say, some of the spin and some of the thinking going on in the Tory party at the moment. The Times, the FT, others are, I think they're much more objective. They have their, they know what their politics are, but which is a bit of a pity, because for a long time, and like yourself, John, I've been in this business a long time, and I've worked with some very good people when the Telegraph was less of a propaganda sheet. It used to draw a very strong distinction between comment and between facts. It was known for having correspondents all around the world and for very good, sometimes quite saucy news coverage, but in the courts. But it was a comprehensive, proper newspaper. It's become something different these days.
Yeah, I mean, because of its skeptical take on what's happening with.
In part, largely because it's been an uncritical mouthpiece for Euroscepticism and for the Tory party.
Full disclosure, Bernard, you've been virulently anti-Brexit.
Yes, but then once it's been accepted, the biggest source of despair for us has been the sheer. It's something that was built on a whole platform of lies and incompetence, which we have seen. But
it was also, I mean, it was also opposed on a lot of fear that we'll now see whether that's going to happen or not.
Well, I think the analogy that people use is the boiling frog, because you had certain people who were particularly rash and extreme. They were prophesying doom straight away and apocalyptic and cataclysmic outcomes from day one. That was almost ammunition for the anti-European ideologues in the party, the Malfrançois, the various people like that. So it was all Project Fear, nothing happened. Yet if you look at incrementally what has been happening, if you look at even the FT, which again would have been anti-Brexit, it's pointing out all the euro denomination, euro bonds, they're gradually moving out of London. It's been accomplished at a huge cost and very little gain. There's never actually been a plan. One of the foremost members of the European Research Group, who I'm sure many people who are familiar with social media will know why he was on an enforced break, but he earned some people's contempt the other day when he said, now that Brexit has happened, it's up to the civil service to come up with a plan to make it work. Because it's quite clear there's never been anything other than a kind of mantra and wishful thinking. There's never been a coherent strategy for what they're supposed to do. And where we are, even at this stage, has been achieved at tremendous, huge financial cost, as well as opportunity cost. But the deal that was eventually accomplished was, it was a good trade deal of its sort. It was inferior to what was already there. And it is the opposite of what Boris Johnson claimed it was. But it's a perfectly workmanlike, perfectly good trade deal.
Well, Bernard, I promised I wouldn't talk about Brexit with you because I knew that it would swallow up a lot of our time.
You can cut all that out.
No. Well, no. The Irish boat blocked from fishing by patrol vessel. This is yeah.
This is the rock hall that you were talking about earlier. There had actually, sorry, when you asked me about that, there'd also been a reported incident between Norwegian vessels and Scottish vessels, and that's where people have been asking about the supposed Scottish Navy.
And then Iceland, Iceland will probably, I mean, we're old enough to remember the dark days of the Cod War. I mean,
there's a famous story. I worked in Brussels for a number of years, both in the mid-80s and back in the mid-noughties. But there was one famous story. There was an Irish journalist who no longer with us, Raymond Smith, who had been was regularly dispatched to the Cod War fish talks, and I think Patrick Hillary might have been the European Commissioner at the time. And in an effort to get a headline, my late former colleague, I should say, Raymond Smith, said, "Commissioner Hillary, does this now mean that fish is a dead duck?" And amongst, say, old Brussels hands, it's one of those ones that comes up every so often.
Very good. It's was he Sunday Independent, Raymond Smith?
He was, and he was daily, and he wrote various, he was diplomatic, and he wrote diplomatic corps, wrote various GAA books, and there's often some sparring between Vincent Browne and himself. But what fish, while it's been used as a touchstone over here as something emblematic, despite a very, very nugatory contribution to the economy, it's always gone for a bit of theatre. When I was over there, the fish, they would always be fish price fixing talks right to the very, very end of Christmas, until I realised, having had to fire late and everything, when I went out for drinks with one of the ministers responsible, and he had the agreement days in advance, and said, "I know, we just like a bit of theatre."
Bit of theatre, my God. I think Raymond Smith, did he write Irby at Irby? Didn't he?
I think that might have been Irby at Irby. I think you might be talking about Kevin Kelly there. Raymond Smith wrote The Hurling Immortals, and he wrote biographies of...
but did he wrote a book about the Pope? Anyway, I'm sorry.
It entirely possibly did, but our paths only crossed over a couple of years. I mean, I may look a lot older. I'm not quite that old.
Oh, you look very sprightly. No.
Leave this one out, but you're talking where you were asking about one thing. There was a famous RTE correspondent who did both religious affairs and space, but he was also in a landmark case where he was prosecuted for interviewing the IRA. Kevin O'Kelly, very, very highly regarded, but because he covered both space and religious affairs, he was nicknamed Irby at Orbit.
That's good. 1 in 50 are infected in Britain.
That's the Office of National Statistics figures that were released early today. And they weren't due to be released until Friday, but they were seized upon. As you can see, well, it's 1 in 50 across the country. It's 1 in 30 in London, and it's a really alarming spread. Now, this has been seized on by Boris Johnson to say why he had no choice but to act as suddenly and as kind of abruptly as he did in announcing the national lockdown yesterday. This has been challenged, because, not least because SAGE and other medical and scientific experts on infection have been warning since before Christmas, and have privately and also publicly in some cases been warning about the relaxation of restrictions before Christmas that people might mix. As a result, we are now expecting here in particular a huge surge about the middle of this month. So what's beginning to happen, if you look at the dates on those figures that the Office for National Statistics have released, is that surge is happening. That since the end of, essentially the end of Christmas, kind of into January, but when the 5 medical advisors issued their joint letter or their statement yesterday, the one thing that they were at pains to emphasize was that they were worried that the NHS would become overwhelmed, which was the fear and the threat about a year ago. But it is, and nobody is in any doubt that this was inevitable, and that people were taking confused messaging and thought, oh, it's okay, we can meet up now. And as a result, we are seeing it spread like wildfire. I think there are concerns that something similar will happen in Ireland as well.
Okay, Bernard, we're dramatically running out of time, but I wanted to quickly just bring you back to the Irish World from today. And can you see that? I'll just share that. Because I wanted to ask you about the exhibition you mentioned on the cover of, I suppose, the entertainment part of the magazine, or the newspaper. 1 second. This is from today. Yeah, nearly there. Forgive me.
No, not at all. This shows that we're quite dutiful about getting it over to you in time.
There we go.
If you go down a bit to the IW2, I think.
That was a great good news story. Aer Lingus to fly from Manchester to the States.
It is, and possibly from Heathrow as well at some point. They set up a subsidiary which is based in Belfast, although because it is, as most people will know, now owned by a Spanish company that also owns British Airways and Iberia. But they, because of Brexit, they had to restructure the board and the ownership, so to ensure that Aer Lingus does actually reflect the national character. So it had ceased pretty much, except in people's own sentiment, to be a flag carrier because it was no longer an Irish or Irish taxpayer-owned airline. But now it does have to have an essential component of being Irish. And there is a residual loyalty among many people, and I suspect you might be quite loyal to Aer Lingus. I know I am. It would be the preferred mode of travel. There are other airlines, as we're aware, and they do a perfectly good job. But it had been doing quite well on the transatlantic route.
My heart is with Aer Lingus, but you know, the price thing is, you know, my wallet.
But that has changed. That has changed.
Yeah. It's marginal now, isn't it? Really.
Yes.
I just very briefly. This is
the Galtymore, the Museum of London, which charts more than 2,000 years of London's history back to Roman era, right up to present day, is moving into the old Smithfield meat market, and it's going to cost 377 million, and it's going to be a major addition to the cultural scene in the capital. It's not due to open for a year or two, but its director of content, Fergus Woolley, wants as one of its keynotes exhibitions to try and showing the kind of fabric of the city, how the Irish community existed, and he wants it to be that he is of himself. I think he worked in Brent himself, I think, in the 90s. But he thinks the Galtymore, which was probably the foremost of up to 19 dance halls in London, still thought of very, very fondly by a large generation of our readers. It ended in 2008, but to everyone from Joe Dolan to, you name it, from Chauvin scene, right down to Nathan Carter got his first gig there. Our late founder of the paper set that up for him. So he got to open for Big Tom, which is why we've always had a good and close relationship with him. But he's appealed to people, anyone who knows where the sign might have gone, or because he wants to have an oral history of a resilient group of people in London as typical of the various lives that exist in the capital.
And just to, I mean, it was John Byrne's club, wasn't it?
Yes.
Who became a very prominent property developer in Ireland, built O'Connell Bridge House, I think.
That's correct, and his son ran it. I think the son's had it.
Yeah.
But it, I joined the Irish World some years after it had closed, and but it had, as I said, it's part of the local folklore, not least because of the Irish World Award Nights, which we have some footage of Richard Harris very jovially pointing out he was due to accept his award at 8 in the evening and that this was 3 or 4 in the morning. And I think people like Darrell Breen and Elda May, various others, Brendan O'Carroll over the years. One of the first tasks that the late Paddy Cowan, my old boss, whom we lost last year, had when I arrived at the paper in 2012, was he hadn't had an awards for a few years, so we had to do it again. So set one up in 2012 in Hammersmith, and a very, very prominent Irish entertainer took exception to another less famous Irish entertainer and went ballistic on social media with worse than any kind of how one describe it, say, merchant seaman. And there was a certain amount of trying to duck that one down, and there was a rather panicky Irish presenter who was worried about the reputational damage on that one. But everyone else said they had a lovely time. So then about 5 years later, we had another one, and Nathan Carter led the evening on that one, and we had but that was somewhat more sedate. We'd learned something along the way.
Brilliant. Bernard, thank you very much for doing this tonight. Will you maybe join us next week?
I'd be delighted to.
Go to the Irish World. Thank you very much. And
best of luck to Broadsheet.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Bernard. Thank you.